to have you. And I want to give a shout out first to Stacy Francis, founder of Savvy Ladies, who is here tonight to say hello. Stacy, I'm going to spotlight you so you could say hello to everyone.
Yeah, happy 2025 for all of you guys who have made finances your 2025 resolution. Guess what? You're putting it into practice. We have a fantastic event tonight, fantastic speakers, and I know we're going to be talking a little bit about the helpline, all the resources that you can have. Savvy Ladies is here for you. And I have to tell you, 2025 is going to be our best year yet. The programming we have for this year is unlike anything I've ever seen. And so stay tuned, stay involved. And again, happy 25. It's going to be a great year.
Well, thank you, Stacy. And we are so excited that each of you are here with us this evening, spending your time to learn with us. It really is around the power of asking questions, and we're thrilled that you are here. So Savvy Ladies, many of you know, because I see so many familiar faces, is we're about helping women every day, empower you with financial education so you know what steps to make as you move forward in your financial journey. We want you each to have and learn about securing your own finances for financial security. Savvy Ladies offers a free financial helpline, and this is available to you. We'll put the link in the chat. So at any time during this evening's program or there following, submit your questions. I know some of you have already submitted your questions. Because of the holidays, it's taken the volunteers just a little longer, but do not worry, you are in the queue. Tracy here, who handles the helpline, we do see some of those questions from each of you sitting maybe 48 hours, a little longer than we want, but we are reaching back out to our volunteers. They're just getting back in. It was that longer holiday weekend that we had that many went away. So hang on, and we are here for you. Really excited about today's kickoff to our series, our Get Savvy Speakers series, where we want to help navigate your and manage your financial expectations, help you set goals and boundaries. What really is yours, mine, and ours as you go through thinking about marriage, planning marriage, post-marriage, divorce, and planning divorce, that divorce journey. So we want to help you navigate each of those phases of your life. And our panelists today, I'm very excited to introduce them, are really going to help you navigate through that. But before I introduce everyone, I want to also thank, who you'll see as our panelists, our sponsors for the series and for this panel this evening is Hello Prenup. Really amazing. It's an amazing business. I'm going to share a little bit about it, but we have the CEO and founder, Julia Rogers, who's also a board member. And thank you, Julia, for sponsoring Savvy Ladies and continuing your support. And Miller Zeinerman law firm is also a sponsor. Lisa Zeinerman is our board chair. Which leads me to really thank Lisa, because she is a champion of empowering women. And what I love about Lisa, and you can read her bio, but Lisa is all about being in control of your own finances. Do not abdicate it at any stage of your life to anyone else. If you have a partner, do it with them. Understand what's happening. Own your finances. Owning that is your own power. So financial knowledge is power. And I love that. That explains and identifies who Lisa is, because in her role, both as board chair and her role as being an entrepreneur, running her own business, empowering women, she fights for you. And that is the beautiful thing. She is a unicorn because it's matrimony and finances wrapped in one, and she doesn't let you down. So Lisa, I'm really excited for you to moderate our panel tonight. And thank you again for sponsoring and supporting Savvy Ladies every single day, because you live it. Julia, you are an amazing, amazing board member, but such an entrepreneur. And I love that you describe yourself as a legal entrepreneur. That is so cool. So cool. And you identified a need because you wanted to empower women so they would understand their finances as they're moving into a marriage, so that they could, if they're thinking ultimately, if a divorce happens, they have money, they can be in control, and they know what to happen. The big thing is to ask questions. And I love that you created a business. And how cool was it that you were on Shark Tank? And I'm going to share this quick story is because Julia was on Shark Tank in 2021. Lisa saw the episode and Lisa was like, Julia, I need to know her. And sure enough, that's Lisa. Lisa reached out to Julia, and here we are today. It made history. You got a deal with the Shark Tank. You became a Savvy Ladies board member, and here we are today, empowering women with financial knowledge and helping them figure out the best way to support themselves. Love it. Amanda, I'm so happy and proud that you joined our junior board at Savvy Ladies and you agreed to be on this panel. You represent the young woman who is taking control of their career, understanding finances, and you're building that together to support other women as you build out your own practice as a CFP. So I love that Amanda found Savvy Ladies to volunteer. That's how she found us first and foremost. She wanted to volunteer as a young professional. So after her volunteering, she recognized that Savvy Ladies was launching a junior board and found us and asked us and came on board to be our first junior board member as part of our junior board team. So thank you for joining us tonight to sharing your knowledge about a young professional making money, empowering women, talking about, and actually taking the taboo out of talking to money about money at a younger age. And Lauren Lavender. Lauren is part of the Hello Prenup team. She is their CMO. I love her story. She has her own personal story that she had a prenup, but it wasn't a great prenup. It was terrible. And she found Julia because she was looking to exit a bad marriage. And to do that, she had to find work and make her own money. And that connection helped her find Julia, who posted to say, I'm looking for some social media marketing expertise. They got connected. And now Lauren Lavender will join us tonight sharing her story. And you'll see how there is light at the end of the tunnel. She is thriving. So Lisa, I turn it back to you now. I turn it actually over to you to lead this dynamic discussion tonight.
Thanks so much, Judy, and thank you, Stacy, for joining us. We're really honored to have you as our founder, and Judy, thank you for putting these programs together. And obviously, Julia, thank you for being a sponsor for tonight with Hello Prenup. And I see Lauren is wearing the sweatshirt that I was wearing all weekend, Hello Prenup. So it's a great sweatshirt and a great company, and it's in the tech world. So. Some of you are familiar faces, some of you are not, but I'm going to say that I just want to say up front, we did a survey, we sent out a survey to find out what everybody was interested in, and we got a lot of responses, which was great, and some very specific questions, which I do want to make sure that we get to tonight. So I think I have like about 12 or 13 questions, so we're going to leave ourselves enough time to get through them because they are actually really important questions. But we're going to get started. We're going to go through as quickly as we can. We're going to get to as much as we can, and then we're going to leave ourselves enough time. And if we and people can put questions in the chat too. I think what we'll do is we'll get through some of the questions and that we have prepared, and then we'll go to some of the questions that were sent in, and we'll deal with the chats as well. So we've got a lot to cover, everybody. So let's do it. So Julia, you know I am all about financial transparency. It's like basically could be my logo on my sweatshirt. So why don't you tell me what is your understanding of what financial transparency is?
Absolutely. So financial transparency in a relationship, I think means being really open and honest about your financial situation. This can include income, expenses, savings, debt, even financial goals. And I think it really requires both parties to actively communicate about their financial standing and what those goals are. And we talk all about the conversation at Hello Prenup, because that conversation about life goals is key when you're in a relationship.
And, it's interesting in terms of financial transparency. You talked about debt and you talked about assets and income. Why is it important for people to be transparent about all of these issues in terms of a relationship, whether it be a marriage or a partnership of any kind?
Yeah, I think being financially transparent empowers, well, we're women here, so empowers women in particular by ensuring they're informed and they have a say in financial decisions. The saying, money is power, is true, right? If you have access and you're a part of those financial decisions, it contributes to a sense of control over your own financial future. And I think that when partners share financial information, it prevents one of them from being overly controlling or limiting the other's access to money, which I know, Lisa, you have seen in your practice, as have I, which is a form of financial abuse. And that financial transparency will therefore foster an environment of equality in the relationship.
And I'm also going to say, just from experience, that I think that it does eliminate control to some degree, but it also helps everybody actually make a plan. And I think that sometimes people are planning one thing and somebody else is planning another thing because they're not aware of what the total plan is, because they don't have an idea of what the total assets are, what the actual income is, where the accounts are. And so they are planning, but they actually are planning with blinders on because the other person isn't being transparent. And I think that that is really an unfair situation and makes for a really bad dynamic, particularly during, and frankly at the time people may decide that they're going to sever their relationship, and certainly at the beginning of a relationship as well. So Amanda, you are a financial advisor, and you work with people who are going through divorces. And what happens if you are divorced and you're now considering remarriage? And I know some of you will say, I'll never get remarried again, but you'd be surprised. I just had a client this week who called, who said, actually last week, who called and said, you did my divorce and now I want to get remarried and I need a prenup. Okay. It was like music to my ears. Okay. And so when should couples start to be having those conversations around money and prenups, et cetera?
Absolutely. So, in my opinion, it's really never too early to start talking about money. And I don't mean that the first date you pull out your bank app and you start discussing bank statements, but there's a lot of things that go into your finances, and a big one is your goals. So, I think it's important to talk about your financial future, talk about your goals with your significant other. But you absolutely need to kind of sit down and get through the hard details before any important joint financial decisions. So whether that be moving in together, maybe that's buying a large anything together, or engagement, anything where you're going to potentially intermingle your finances. That's a very important time to make sure that you sit down and get a good idea of both of your financial situations, maybe look at your past finances, but most importantly, look at your future and your planning together going forward.
And Julia, I know that that Kevin O'Leary from the Shark Tank has a view of when this conversation should actually occur.
Yeah.
So when does Kevin think it should occur?
Third date, second glass of wine.
Okay. So, and when do you think it should occur?
I kind of agree with him. I hate to say it, but I do agree with Kevin, because I think really early and often is the time to have a conversation about what life goals and what that means and how money filters into all of that. So I think unless you're kind of just dating for sport and you're not serious, I think having the conversation, third date, second glass of wine, sounds great.
So I'm going to say, in my view, okay, that you watch those early dates, and you watch how people spend money, and you watch what they do before I would have that conversation. I would just kind of like be observant about what people are thinking is important, what their goals might be, what they're willing to spend on, what they're not willing to spend on, what are the conversations that they may be talking about in terms of their families, how they grew up, all of those kinds of things. That's just my view. I think if I had had those conversations on my third date, I might not have gone forward in either of my marriages. So, but for different reasons. But I would say, I think part of it is to be really observant and to be thinking about how this is this consistent with your own views about money and how you want to spend and save, etc. So some of the people on actually have said that they are interested in prenups. So tell us, Julia, what is a prenup?
Sure. A prenup is a legal agreement that must be drafted, negotiated, and signed before you get married. And the intention is to delineate what is separate property or marital property, also known as community property in certain states, in the event of divorce or death. And what I always like to remind people is a prenup is just as much an emotional document as it is a legal one. It's a mission statement to make sure we're really aligned on this thing.
And you talked about separate versus marital property. So you talked about a few things. You talked about community property, which we don't have in New York, by the way. There
Yep.
are certain states like California that have community property, and we are a nationwide organization. So it's important that we define community property for those states. And in New York and in Massachusetts, where I think you are, Julia, in terms of we have what's called equitable distribution. And we do definitely talk about separate versus marital property. So tell me what separate versus marital property means to you.
Sure. So separate property is property that is yours and yours alone. And in a prenup, it is property that you are delineating is yours and not part of the marital estate. When we're talking about marital property, we're talking about property that could be subject to division in the event of divorce or death, depending on your estate plan. We won't go into that now. And how these things are factored by default is greatly dependent on whether or not your state is an equitable distribution state or community property state. So I don't know if you want to get into that, Lisa, but I'm happy to explain what that is too.
So sure. So before you you get into that, I'm just going to say that there's some common misconceptions about what marital property is and what separate property is. So can you clear that up?
Yeah, sure. So I think it depends on what state you're in, right? If we're nationally speaking, it depends on those state laws. So every state will have, like I know in Massachusetts, we have a list of factors that help determine what is separate, meaning what is only yours versus what is marital and what is subject to division. In community property states, everything that was before the marriage is separate. Everything that is post-marital is community. In equitable distribution, again, and I think this is what you're getting at, Lisa, it's not so cut and dry, right? So you could have a piece of property that was, purchased before the marriage, and given the circumstances that you're divorced, a judge can say, well, I'm going to split that in half 50-50, that's marital property. And there are often a list of factors that help that judge determine how to consider that property.
So in New York, it's very important that you be able to trace your separate property, and the person who actually is claiming the separate property has the burden to trace that property. Now, interestingly, title doesn't necessarily mean everything. So you could have a separate property claim against something that is jointly titled. So let's just say myself and my husband, we have a home, and let's just say that I came into the marriage with that home. I might actually be able to get a separate property credit for that home based upon the value as of the date of the marriage. Or I might come into the marriage with a retirement account, and if I kept all my statements, or I could prove in some other way what I had as of the date of the marriage, and even though I put other retirement monies into the account during the marriage, I might still be able to get back what I came into the marriage with and maybe the appreciation of it. So, but what happens sometimes is people come to me, and I'm sure this happens with you, and they say, don't worry, That's the first thing they tell me. And that's like already, I think to myself, oh my God, I'm definitely worried now, because they tell me, don't worry, I kept everything in my name. And I said, that's great. But did you put in your income that you earned during the marriage into that account that you're telling me you kept in your name? Sure, I did that. And then I say, but and did you take some money out and did you put some money in? And the answer is yes. And now what we have done is commingled the separate property and the marital property, and probably can't trace it anymore, because to Stacy Francis's example that she always gives, it's like a glass of water and you pour some in and you pour some out and it all looks like water. And the problem with that is you can no longer be traced. And so we often hire experts, which I'm sure you do too, Julia, or did when you were doing this, to trace separate property. But the best thing that you can do is to keep your statements. And right, I mean, that's the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, and don't commingle. Don't mix things together.
And the very best thing you can do is what? To make sure you keep your separate property separate.
I want to say have a prenup.
Yeah, that's the best thing that you can do. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so who should consider having a prenuptial agreement?
I think everyone getting married should consider having a prenuptial agreement. People often say, oh, I don't have enough money. I don't need a prenup. I completely disagree. And I think that women in particular should always have a prenup. And I just want to say women are socially conditioned to feel like, wanting money, talking about money, negotiating about money is inherently unattractive. If you make money, don't talk about it. It's all wrapped up in this negativity. But really what that's saying is that negativity around money and financial protection is to women's detriment. And so I think when we're talking about prenups, I also think we're really talking about postnups. A prenup or a postnup should be protective of both parties, and especially women. And you should always have one. If you don't have a prenup, I think you should have a postnup.
What's a postnup?
A postnup is a legal document that is created after marriage to, again, do many of the same things as a prenup, delineate what is separate property versus what is marital property, what happens in the event of a divorce or death. But a postnup is not as enforceable in all states. I know in some states like New York, Lisa, they are readily enforced. In other states like New Jersey, for example, I don't believe they are. And so it is important to remember, if you are getting married and you're considering, should I get a prenup, or maybe I'll just get a postnup because I don't feel like dealing with this now, I would get a prenup first and foremost. And if you miss that opportunity, a postnup is a great opportunity to have those conversations.
So you make a good point. In New York, postnups are enforceable, and they're enforceable just as much as actually prenups, as long as they're done correctly. Somebody has asked, is it a requirement for them to be prenups and postnups to be prepared by an attorney, or is it possible to do it yourself? So what's your answer to that, Julia?
Okay. Well, number one, I don't think you should be doing it yourself, right? The prenup or postnup written on the back of the napkin, that's not going to be upheld in court in any state. I do think that you can negotiate the broad terms of a prenup through a platform like Hello Prenup, and this is why we created it, because it gives you options that are state specific. These are options that were created by attorneys in conjunction with attorneys, but then gives you the option to work directly with an attorney licensed in your state to advise you on the document and to sign off on it as your attorney, even help you negotiate parts of it. So my perspective is, if you feel more comfortable kind of taking it into your own hands, Hello Prenup is a wonderful option, but never underestimate the power of working with an attorney and obtaining that legal advice.
So I think that's really true. And I think that I will say one of the factors in New York courts that they look at is whether or not there was an attorney on both sides representing the person. And it's not a factor that causes somebody to set aside. That will not do it itself, right? So if you don't have an attorney and you enter into a prenup or a postnup, it's not that it will be set aside because you didn't have an attorney. However, if it is what we call unconscionable, which means nobody in their right mind would have signed it, okay? Or it's extremely in someone's favor, or somebody is claiming that they were under a severe pressure at the time, and maybe the other side had an attorney. It is something that the court will look at as a factor in whether or not the prenup or the postnup, for that matter, should be set aside. And so it's not determinative, but it is definitely a factor. Would you agree with that, Julia?
Totally. And that's the case in the vast majority of states. Yes.
And by the way, somebody asked, does Hello Prenup cover Puerto Rico?
Not yet, but soon.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
And somebody else asked, are postnups enforceable in California? And I don't know the answer to that.
Postnups in California. Now, I'm not a California licensed attorney. We work with many licensed attorneys in California, and postnups are a little bit more complex in California. It depends on how long you're married. Is it something that you are doing right after you got married because you didn't have the opportunity to get a prenup? Then yes, that is really common. If you're getting a postnup, 20 years in, it really changes the nature of the agreement and what can be contracted to, and is very, very specific to each individual situation.
So there's a question in here that I think is a really important question. It is, would you all recommend opening new accounts for everything after the marriage to not commingle pre and post marriage money? And here's the other choice that the person is given, or just maintaining statements to show what was in the account before the marriage. So I'm going to jump in for this because it's like, this is the recipe for a disaster if you could have one. Maintaining the statements is not going to be enough if you've commingled the monies. It will not do you any good, okay? Basically, you should absolutely, so I'm going to say it again, you should absolutely keep your marital property, your premarital property, and any inheritances, by the way, that you get in separate accounts. Do not commingle or mix that money with anything that you earn or get during the marriage. Keep it separate and apart, that premarital money. Keep the statements also, and trust me, people do keep the statements. I have had clients who come to me who have those statements for 20 or 25 years. I'm amazed, okay? I'm absolutely amazed. And then I have the other clients who wish they had the statements, and they lose millions of dollars because they don't have those statements, and there's no way to trace it. There's just no way. And so do not mix those monies. That's the first and safest thing you could do, and keep your statements. It's so important. Julia, any other tips here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, to your point, Lisa, and I know that this is true, at least in Massachusetts, but moving separate property money into a joint account and out, even if it goes into the joint account for a week, less than a week, it is considered commingled. And I had a case that I worked on that was like that. The client lost millions and millions of dollars of that separate property. Even though they had a prenup, they did everything right, except for moving that money, and it commingled it.
Yep. And I would agree with that, Julia. And I had a similar case. I will say sometimes you can argue that it was for convenience purposes, that you put the money in for convenience purposes, and that you immediately moved it out. And sometimes I have prevailed on this argument. If it's a week or month, sometimes even 6 months, we've prevailed. But the longer it stays in, the harder it will be. And of course, you've created a problem the minute you did it. And frankly, I had a client who did this. He had a great prenup. He did this. I know why he did it. He wanted to save on wire fees. So he would put money into one account to save that $35 wire fee. And he ended up paying millions for all those little wire fees. So be careful what you do. Be careful, like thoughtful about it. So somebody also asked, is it true that you can't use these separate accounts for the benefit of the family? This and says this gets tricky. That's a very simple question. If you use it, it's gone. So you can use it, but it's gone. We can't take it back. We can't get it back for you. You've taken the separate property and you've used it. It's gone. So the advice is use marital monies for marital expenses. Don't use your separate monies and have a prenup. So Julia, who might consider a postnuptial agreement?
I think anybody who didn't get a prenup. So if you, again, didn't have the opportunity to get a prenup because you were rushing and you weren't ready or you didn't talk about it, a postnup is a great opportunity to have all of those kind of life planning, goals conversations, financial transparency conversations. And then I think those who have major life changes. So let's say you've been married for 10, 15 years. Again, this depends on which state you're in. But if you're married for 10, 15 years and let's say an inheritance comes through or you start a business or there's some major shift, you leave your job and you're raising kids, I think a postnup can be a really wonderful tool to help ensure you're on the same page. I've also seen postnups really work for couples where there has been some major breakdown in the marriage about money, how to manage it. And having a postnup really allows them to have the conversations about how do we want to manage our money. And that actually helps them get their marriage back on track, which I think is wonderful.
So somebody wrote in, what about a house I own with no mortgage? He moves in and starts contributing money for the utilities or the HOAs and will it remain my separate property? What do you have to say to this, Julia?
Yeah. So in many states, if you are to have a prenup and you list that as your separate property, that's all you need. In certain other states, that contribution will actually by default transmute that property. Well, not transmute that property, but give that person an interest in that property. So what you want to do is make sure if you're getting married, you have a prenup that spells it out. There are certain clauses that have to be included, certain case law that has to be cited in many states to ensure that remains separate, but you really want to be intentional about it because it can create issues if you don't.
And I will say that when we create a prenup for people or a postnup, we're very clear about what is an expense that will create what we call a credit. So for example, paying down a mortgage, the amortization of the mortgage, and we're very specific. It's not the interest. It's just when that balance goes down, you get a credit for it. Even if it's the other person's separate property, real estate taxes, you will get a credit for. Sometimes insurance. But if it's something like, for example, you have an apartment in the city and you're paying maintenance, I don't give any credit for that in my prenups because you'd be paying rent. And so there's no credit for that. But the amortization, you usually get a credit. And that's because in a divorce, you usually would get a credit too for that. But Julia is right about one thing. You have to be so careful, which is why you should have a prenup or a postnup, because judges all have their own ideas. And sometimes they don't follow the case law. And that's unfortunate, but it's a reality. And so, Julia used the word transmute, and I'm going to tell you that lots of judges don't even know what that word transmute means, unfortunately. So you really have to be careful about what you do and thoughtful about what you do. And that's really the case. In prenups, Julia, you see student loans often, I'm assuming, put in,
Yes.
correct? And
Yes.
why is that?
Well, because you want to ensure that you are not responsible for your partner's debt. So you can include debt in a prenup as separate debt. And I have seen it in divorce cases. Again, it always depends on the circumstance, but one party becomes in the divorce responsible for a portion of the other party's student debt. And again, if you don't have a prenup, in many states, you're leaving that to chance. I think I want to add to your point, Lisa, is family court judges in almost every state have tremendous discretion on how they decide certain things. And those things can be based off of the law and case law, or they could be based off their own personal biases or experience. And so if you don't have a prenup, you are really leaving these things to chance.
So somebody asked, what does the word credit mean? So let me just explain that. So when I draft a prenup, for example, we give, and let's just say there's a pay down of the amortization of the mortgage, meaning the balance gets paid down. When the property is sold, okay, or there's a divorce and there's a payout, then that person gets half their money back. Usually it's half. So let's just say that I paid $100,000 down. Julia and I are married, and Julia actually has her separate apartment, but I've been paying into the mortgage, and I pay down basically $100,000 of my money into her separate property. And my prenup says I get 50% of that money back. And so I get when we get divorced, she gets to actually give me 50% of that money back when she buys me out from the apartment. That's essentially what the credit means. So I'm racking up essentially credits so that I get money at the end. And that's something that is negotiated very often in a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement, so that you're not paying for someone else's home. It's important, actually, if you're getting remarried, to think about that, because how you split the expenses and what you're paying for and how you're going to get your money back is really important. So I hope that clarified. If it didn't, let me know. And then somebody else that just asked about student loans, which we just discussed, we pay them off together. That money is gone. Yeah, that money is gone. And by the way, if you get divorced and you didn't have a prenup whereby it was spelled out as to whose responsibility the student loans are, no judge is going to get into that, because in New York, for example, there is a very specific case called Matisoff versus Dobie, which actually speaks to this particular issue, and you will not get your credit because the judge is not going to figure out why you paid down this loan or didn't, or what discussions you all had, or how you decided to split your expenses. So nobody's getting into that. So Lauren, I'm going to move on to you for a second. I know you're divorced. Did you have a prenup?
I sure did. I went through the traditional attorney process of Googling attorney near me to draft a prenup. I went through the prenup process with my fiance. We got married and had children, and now I am divorced.
And had the prenup work out for you?
It held up completely. The issue for me was that it was so incredibly one-sided, and I signed away so many rights that I really didn't understand what I was entering into until I was getting out of it. For me, what I wish I would have done differently in that instance was not outsource my trust in the attorneys that I hired to draft this agreement and represent me. What I should have done was educate myself entirely on what it was like, and what my agreement actually means. If I were to do it all over again, I would absolutely use a prenup. Use a platform like Hello Prenup, which is why I joined the company, because what was missing for me was the educational piece of what should I be thinking about as the lesser earning spouse who has potentially more to lose by entering into this agreement than the person that had 10 million in assets, has been married before, and can absolutely hire any attorney they want to, whenever they want to protect them and their needs.
And I'm just going to say, when you are going through your prenup, be very careful about signing away, if you're not the moneyed person, about signing away your rights to legal fees. So sometimes I see these prenups and they literally say that each person is going to pay their own legal and expert fees in the event of a divorce. And if I am representing the non-moneyed spouse, the one who probably is going to need somebody else to help pay it, I am very careful about those waivers. So be super careful about that language. So Lauren, how long did your divorce take?
Yep, so I was married for 2 years and my divorce took 2 years.
And what was it like to go through the divorce?
It was pretty painful even with a prenup. So the beauty of a prenup in theory is that you've had all the discussions before you even got married, right? So you know what your outcome is. You know the fate on the first date kind of a thing. You know how this is going to go. And so for me, what was really painful was when I asked for the divorce, when I knew that after I've quit my job to stay home and raise my child, I have no income, this marriage isn't working out for me. I had to figure out how to get myself out of it, knowing that there was a prenup above my head that says you're not going to get anything if you leave. No alimony, nothing. I get to keep the family home. You get to, nothing was helpful for me. And so what I wish I would have done differently was really educate myself in the prenup process of what it's really like to get a divorce as well. Because what ended up happening is the prenup was black and white what is going to happen. The only thing, there's nothing I could contest. It didn't matter that I quit my job and I lost 2 years of income. It didn't matter that I stayed home and raised our son and I didn't get paid for it. None of that mattered during a pandemic and all of these fun things that are going on anyways. None of that mattered. When you get a divorce, the judge looks at the prenup and they say, well, you signed this, so we are going to uphold this. The only thing there was to discuss was child support for my son. And so we kept the conversation very focused on that. But that, because we didn't talk about that at the time of the prenup, is a very emotionally charged conversation. And so it took a very long time. And my ex-husband used a lot of tactics to prolong it, try to make me tired, spend more money on the problem, try to outspend me, and just drag his feet in perpetuity, right? He just wanted to make a statement because he was unhappy that I was leaving the marriage. And so what I learned during that process is divorce is the best self-care you can give yourself, but hang in there because it's a long road. It's very expensive. It's emotionally charged. It's tiring. But what I really learned is what you're capable of. And I would do it all over again. And the only thing I would do differently is make sure that I didn't have that one-sided prenup and that I was very much represented, considering things like, since I stayed home, having a lump sum clause in there that said for every year I stayed home to raise our kids, I would get X amount of his income put in my own separate property, or he would contribute X amount into my retirement accounts. That way there wasn't this power imbalance where I have to ask for a credit card to go get Sephora's and diapers, for something for myself and my son. And that was what you were talking about earlier, Lisa, about judges and their discretions, and they don't care. They don't care about the weeds of things. They don't care that you had to ask for the Sephora, credit card to go buy diapers or whatever. They don't care about that. What they care about is what you put in that agreement and what you guys can agree to on your own terms. They don't want to get into the weeds of things. And so another thing I learned is never outsource your trust in the government, because the only person that can advocate for you is you. So make sure you're doing that early and often, whether you're getting a prenup, whether you're getting a divorce, and making sure you know your state laws and how to advocate for them for yourself.
So somebody talked about resilience. So I always call it stamina. Okay, I think that a lot of doing well in a divorce is about stamina. If you don't have the stamina, the other person is going to have it. I'm telling you now. You have to have an attorney who has stamina, and you have to have stamina, because if you're not going to go the distance, you will probably have a problem. You will not get as good a deal. People get tired. They get tired of paying the bills. They get tired of doing the discovery. They get tired of doing the depositions. They want it to end. I always say to people, you have to look at what your possibility is, and could you earn that much, okay, in the year? Because it's like a job. Going through a divorce is like a job, and you have to figure out what is the amount that I'm going to earn in a particular year or particular 2 years, frankly, by going through my divorce. And maybe that is something I might never earn again. And so I need to stick with it. And it's a job like any other job. It may not be very pleasant, but you're in it because you want to make the best deal for yourself that you can. And I would say the prenup is very similar, okay? In that I have people who get tired of negotiating, right? They want to get married. They've already picked out the dress and the venue and the invitations, and right, you're shaking your head, Julia, and you know what I'm talking about. And then they come to you and it's like, I just want to sign this. And I'm like, no, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think If I had been Lauren's attorney, I would have said no. I mean, and that's kind of the really interesting part about Lauren's story is if only she had had more effective counsel, if only she had asked more questions, if only she had had a resource to go to. And again, none of that was available to her at the time. But I think the lesson in Lauren's story is don't just outsource. Oh, well, I hired this attorney. They'll give me all the information I need. You really have to do your own research and you really have to dig into the questions. And again, this is part of why we created this platform, because we wanted a free place for all of that information to live, where there were no barriers to entry.
And I'm going to say one more thing. You have to be willing to walk. Like the people who I have negotiated the best prenups for have been willing to walk. They have been willing to say, I'm not signing this. This isn't good. I'm not in this. You do your thing, Lisa. And if he or she isn't going to sign it that way, then I'm out. And those are the people, whether they be the person with the money or the person without the money, those are the people who do the best. So, and I'll say one more thing, which is it's a tactic to hand that prenup to somebody 2 weeks before or 3 weeks before or 4 weeks before, when the wedding venue has been picked and the invitations are sent and your family is flying in and you're telling me all of this. And honestly, I'm not that interested in that. I'm interested in doing the deal that needs to be done. And you have to be interested in the same thing. And that's really important because that is a tactic. So there's a couple of questions I want to just answer here. I've been married 10 years and contemplating divorce, no prenup or postnup. Husband has not worked the entire time we have been married, and I have been the sole breadwinner. He claims to look for work, but not successfully. I'm not happy with the arrangement. And am I likely to owe him alimony in the event of a divorce, even though I wanted him to work and he did not? The answer is yes. You are likely going to be paying alimony. But here's the deal. The longer you stay in the marriage, the longer time you're going to be paying alimony. So it's a simple thing. It's a durational number in New York. The marriage goes for a certain length, and you are going to pay a percentage of that length. And it depends. The longer you stay in, the more you will pay. And also the more you're not saving for yourself. So, and you're right. If somebody wrote, this is more common than you might think. Yes, we see it all the time. So, and we see it in both directions, by the way. Okay. Husbands say they want their wives to work. Wives say they want their husbands to work. Okay. But the bottom line is, if it's not working for you, staying longer isn't going to change it. There's other things you can do. There's ways to do vocational analysis and see what could be the earning potential. And we do all of this. And in some of our next series, you will be talking about this. There's other things to do. But, okay, the longer you stay, I promise you, the more you're going to pay. It's just that simple. So, and then there was another question. I'm just going to scroll back up here that I thought was important. I've been in a 5-year divorce. We're now in settlement. I have no attorney. He is in total control of the assets in California, and he commingled everything. Any suggestions of a lawyer who can just negotiate? So I don't know where the divorce actually is taking place and whether everybody lives in California. California is very different than many of the things I've said, because a lot of what I base it on is New York law, because I'm a New York attorney. I don't know if somebody's living in California and the divorce is going to take place in New York, that will change things. But and you can write to us if you want, but that will change things. So, and I don't know what all the circumstances are and how commingled everything is. And I will also say, don't believe everything that you hear from your ex-spouse to be. And then I loved this one. I was married young, 23, and we hardly had anything, both graduate students. We divorced 20 years later, thinking of advising my daughter as she gets older, even when we don't have a lot, is a prenup necessary? Or is this mostly focused on second marriages and when one has more assets? So Julia, I'm going to turn that to you, back to you.
Oh my God, my favorite question. Thank you. Yes, I think even when you're young and you don't have anything and all you have is student debt, you should still have a prenup. And I like to use the example of, let's say your daughter gets married and her and her partner, they're both making good money, about the same salaries when they get married. I know, Lisa, you've seen divorce cases like this years later. A few years later, your daughter has a child and then leaves the workforce, and to raise kids while they're little. This is really common, right? Now she isn't earning income, but her husband's earning trajectory is straight upwards. So if she divorces in the future, she's going to be at an extreme disadvantage, right? She's been out of the workforce while her colleagues have advanced. And guess what? Alimony and spousal support probably isn't going to be sufficient. And I've seen this countless times. I've seen these really educated women who, upon a divorce, end up taking a job that is far below their education and experience level because they have to make ends meet. And a prenup can protect from all of this. It can allow you and your partner to contract to what happens if one of you decides to stay home with the kids for a period of time. This is something that in a lot of ways relates to Lauren's story.
Hey, sister, hold on a second. I'm trying to put the volume down.
Prenups now can also allow you to discuss reproductive property in a prenup. This is something that Lisa and I recently wrote a New York Law Journal article about. This is, when mishandled, disproportionately negatively affects women. So embryo clauses in prenups are very popular. So I would encourage you to have the conversation with your daughter about, what is it that you want out of life and out of this marriage and that you want with this partner, and find ways to include much of that in a prenup.
So I'm going to say two things. Number one, somebody asked if a prenup can expire after a certain amount of time. We call it a sunset clause. I will say I'm not a big fan of sunset clauses because I think people actually sometimes stay in a marriage and file right before the sunset clause, or use that sunset clause to be very manipulative. I don't usually write sunset clauses. In fact, I don't think I've ever written a sunset clause as that. And yes, after a certain amount of time, things are different, but that's why you plan it out, and you should make an allowance for that. And there's ways to do that so that 20 years from now, you get a different percentage than you do 3 years into the marriage. So there's ways to deal with that without having a sunset clause. I know people like them. I don't. The other thing is somebody asked a question, and I'm trying to see where it is. The person, again, who wrote about the fact that they have to support the other person. I'm telling you now, you're just going to support the other person for a longer amount of time and for more money. So I'm not, I at some point, you have to deal with that. So somebody asked, will the later series get into the specifics of how to do this in a prenup? Maybe somebody can just that person can write in what specifics they're talking about, and then we can go back to that. And I promise that if we don't get to it tonight, we'll get to it in one of the other series, because I'm not sure exactly what that question means. But Amanda, I want to just turn to you and just ask you, as a financial professional, how do you empower women to actually deal with their divorces?
Absolutely. So I think the best way that I can empower women, empower my clients, is with knowledge and education. I think that's a lot of what today is just being able to be knowledgeable about your situation so you can advocate for yourself. But what I like to do is walk beside my female clients, especially those going through a divorce, and help them get a good idea of their financial situation, especially if maybe they're not the person that was managing the finances before. So it's very helpful to get a good idea of your assets or those things that you own in the marriage. So property, bank accounts, retirement accounts, investments, but also your liabilities. So the things that you owe between you and your partner. So like we talked about before, student loans, mortgages, and those types of things. Because the better you are aware of your situation, the better you can plan around that, and also look out for yourself moving forward when you start to plan independently.
And there's a question here that I'll pose to you, Amanda. Unbalanced incomes. If the lower earning partner is raising kids, stopping career trajectory, what are the best ways to minimize the disadvantage for supporting the family in the event of a divorce?
Yeah. So some of the ways that I've seen in the past to build some of that equity back into the marriage is making sure that you're making contributions to both retirement accounts, setting aside some form of investments, so that you can build those up. Because say you're not the working spouse, you're staying home with the kids, well, you likely don't have a 401k plan that you're contributing to. And those types of things can put you very far behind your partner if they are and they're moving forward and they're building up their own savings.
So I'm going to say something a little bit bold, okay? And it comes from representing a lot of women over the years. And I'm going to say that staying home and raising children is lovely and fabulous and really important, but unfortunately it's not rewarded at the end in a divorce. And that is just a fact. It may be rewarded emotionally because your kids are going to be really close to you. It may be rewarded in other ways, but monetarily, it will not be rewarded. Okay. The courts do not reward it. And keep in mind that there's a lot of female judges on the benches, and they have worked and raised their kids, and they expect that somebody else is going to be able to go out and work. And, you know, I've seen too many women who are in their 50s or 60s who have stayed home, raised their kids, supported their husbands, supported their spouse, and they do not get the child support and the alimony that they need to be able to live the lifestyle, and they find it shocking. And it is shocking, but it is a reality of divorce. And so be really careful because and I just saw it like this week. I had a consultation with somebody and they said to me, well, I don't want to go out and the nanny is going to be as expensive as if I go out and work right now. And I said, okay, but the nanny will stay about the same level of salary and you will move through the workforce and continue to grow and continue to grow your salary and be promoted, and you will not always be at the nanny salary. You're going to be like way ahead. And so you need to go out into the workforce and do that. And I guess that's kind of what Judy was talking about before, that when I talk about empowering women, yeah, it isn't sometimes what you want to do, but unless you have a really good prenup that compensates you, and Julia's nodding and Lauren's nodding, unless you have a prenup or a postnup that compensates you for the time that you are spending at home and giving up your ability to be in the workforce, then you will not be happy at the end. So go get that great prenup or go get that great postnup if you actually want to make sure that you're going to be okay at the end, because otherwise you're not going to be okay. Anybody, Julia, Lauren, anything in terms of that?
Lauren, I'm sure you have something to share on that.
Oh my God, 100%. I cannot stress it enough that nobody will advocate for you like you can. And as women, we need to have options. Life comes at us fast from every single angle at every single stage in our lives. We traditionally live longer than men. We are always going to take on the domestic labor. There is the gender pay gap. We have the new government in place that is not very kind to women. The number one thing you can do is advocate for yourself early and often. The more money and the more control you have over your life, the more options you have to be able to get yourself out of bad situations and into really awesome ones. The more information you have, the better. And I think the number one thing you can do if you are a parent is continue to express that behavior so that your children can also express that behavior, right? We have a responsibility to walk the walk as parents. And I think if I were to do it all over again, and if it was my son Kennedy that was getting a prenup, I would make sure he understands everything that is going on in that contract and really understanding what are the outcomes in every single scenario. As women, we need to protect ourselves in every single situation and never be afraid to advocate for it and do whatever it takes to get it done.
Really true. And thank you, Lauren, for that, because it's really true. So Amanda, one of the questions that came in earlier has to do with the net worth statement as far as I'm concerned. And it was how to determine how much money I'll need to bring in each month to support myself and my kids. And how do you determine, how do you help women determine that?
Yeah, absolutely. So really when you're coming out of a divorce, you're in some ways starting over. You have a new level of income, whether it be from spousal support or from working yourself. You have different bills if you're living on your own. And so the best thing you can do initially is to list those out and kind of start working on a basic budget. Figure out what you need to pay off your bills, some things that you might need for wants, and also make sure you build in some savings. And so starting there is a helpful way to figure out, okay, this is what I need to live off of. And then you can work backwards to figure out, okay, if this is what I need to take home, how much do I need to earn and generate to do that? A good kind of rule of thumb, basic starting budget is the 50-30-20 budget. And so basically that says that you should spend 50% of your income on your bills, those expenses that you have to pay. 30% on wants, and then 20% on savings. So retirement savings, bank savings, building up an emergency fund, any of those types of things.
And if you have a client who is coming out of a divorce and wasn't responsible for maintaining the household finances, and they have assets from a divorce and don't know where to like kind of get started, what do you recommend to them?
A good place to get started is one, just get a good overview of everything that you have coming out of the divorce, kind of like I talked about earlier, looking at your new assets, whether you received investments in the divorce or property, what debts you've come out of the divorce with. And then it can be really helpful to work with a financial advisor or professional that can walk beside you to help you organize those and figure out how you can arrange those to help you meet your own goals. So whether it be short-term goals or long-term goals, there's going to be a lot of different changes in your personal situation. And then it can also be helpful in determining where you're going to get your income from, especially if you're older, maybe generating some income from investments, those types of things. A financial advisor can walk beside you in helping you do that.
Okay. And with regard to, so there are still a lot of questions. Judy, we're like at the time, right?
Yes, Lisa, we're at the top of the hour of 7, but if
Okay.
you want to indulge maybe for maybe 6 to 7 more minutes to answer
Yep.
questions.
I do. So
we
that's
can
what I wanted
stay.
to make sure. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to just say that Savvy Ladies has a helpline where we actually connect women via the helpline. You can go on and download the app. It's savvyladies.org, or you can call in and you will be connected with a financial professional. So, and they will help answer your financial questions free of charge. Okay, so that's really important. We help about 3,000 women a year. And we do so because people are very supportive of us in terms of supporting the organization, and we're very fortunate. I also will say that we are starting a mother-daughter program. So for those of you who are concerned about your daughters, we are going to be actually launching this, I think sometime in March, some sort of a mother-daughter program where we will be talking with mothers and daughters about how to start talking about finances, because we don't want our next generation to be in the same situation where we're asking the same questions over and over again and in the same position. So that's very, very important. And then I'm just going to kind of go through, and there's a lot of resources available for free on the savvyladies.org website. There's a lot of articles, and there's webinars and all sorts of information. So please feel free to check it out and to tell your friends to check it out. We also have a Power of the Ask podcast. It's called Power of the Ask. It is run by Savvy Ladies. Myself and Precious Williams, who is also a board member, actually co-host that together. And we interview fabulous, inspirational women who have come from very tough times, frankly. And their stories, they tell their stories and they're very candid. And you should check out the podcast. It's a great podcast. So that's the Power of the Ask. And then I'm just going to kind of go through some of the questions. If I don't get to your questions tonight, we have 3 more sessions that we're doing with other speakers. And so I will incorporate those questions into those sessions also. Can you just give the dates, Judy, of those sessions?
Yeah, I sure will. So the next panel is going to be on February 11th. And we'll really dive into what Amanda started here was understanding your net worth and your financial assets, but also untangling them from your spouses. So how can you begin to untangle them, especially if your spouse is hiding money? We're going to begin to dive into that. We have Gary Rosen, who's joining us. Many of you have heard him before. He's fantastic. I love when he says, follow the breadcrumbs. Amy Holtzman will join us also to talk about your will and setting up your will and how that, and there was a question here, Lisa, I don't know if you caught it, but they asked, does a will, if you have a will, do you need a prenup? And what was the difference? Like, can a will cover your needs that a prenup would? So if maybe there was a distinction between the two, and do you need both? And then we have on the 11th, we're also joined, as we're talking about assets and finding money, by partners that we are working with now at The Real Real to talk about the opportunity of the resale marketplace, and how you can make money from your closet, from jewelry, clothes, handbags, how you can sell items, and it's not seen as income. It's a tax deduction, and it can actually help you in the long run, but give you that cash influx that you might need. That's on the 11th of February. And then we have one February 25th, where Donna Cates, who I think is on the call tonight, will be, yes, you are, Donna. Hi, thank you. I knew I saw you. Thank you so much for joining tonight. She'll be joining our panel, and she'll be talking about setting yourself up for a secure financial future. She'll be joined by one of our friends, Nick, who will also talk around the forensics of looking into your finances and protection, and also talk about cryptocurrency a little, which will be really interesting.
And forensic, he will talk about actually your computers. And so really super important. I see a lot of nodding. He will talk about forensic computer work that he does, figuring out if somebody has been on your computer, if your spouse or ex-spouse has been going through your emails or has set up spyware or any of those things. And we get those questions a lot of the time. He'll talk about how to make sure your account is protected, that you're not sharing the server together in your same house, all of those things. So, and he's our go-to forensic computer person, so he's really good.
Yeah, and it's a really great panel, because as you are setting yourself up for financial success, it's good for you to really start and your computers and your phones, so you're protected as well, especially if you're starting with a new employer. You actually don't want to commingle your personal and your work. So that is also a great way to separate as you're moving forward, your personal and your work data and computers and messaging. So you really have a clean slate as you start. So those are our upcoming panels. So I hope you can all join us for those.
And somebody asked in the chat the specifics on prenups, what's included in a prenup. So I think Julia's website has it. My website has it. So Julia, do you want to give your website?
Yeah, so helloprenup.com. We have a lot of information that is state specific for prenups. If you just navigate to the top of the website, top right, click your state in the drop down, it will have a ton of really useful information on what you can include, what you can't include. Many of our state pages have attorneys in that state who is giving very specific state specific information. I know Lisa's on our New York page, so definitely check it out.
And then on my site, I also have what to include in your prenup, lisazeiderman.com, so you can take a look at that. I will say, the person who asked about the will, they are definitely different documents. They work together. If you actually have somebody who's knowledgeable, they can make sure that they work together, but they are not, one does not replace the other. So just be very clear about that. One does not replace the other. It's not, so somebody said, I think it's too late for a prenup, married a decade plus, but it may not, depending upon the state that you're in, be too late for a postnup. So just keep that in mind. And then one of the other questions is, if I'm left with very little after divorce, what can I do to create financial stability for me and my children? That's a great helpline question, because somebody can go through with you how to put together your situation. So call into the helpline for that particular question. There's a question about how to set up a prenup with a partner who's earned significantly less or has significantly less assets, especially if that partner plans to raise a family and not be earning significant income during the marriage. What are the options? Like paying the partner a yearly salary or paying into the non-working spouse's retirement funds or any other options. So again, I think that this is, I would say there are a lot of options. The thing about doing a prenup or a postnup is you can be creative. You can make this work for you and your partner. And so you can think outside the box. You just have to find the right attorney who can help you with that. And check out Julia's Hello Prenup site, because that will also have some good information. But there's ways to deal with this. Lump sums, I think Julia talked about that earlier. Yearly lump sums, alimony, obviously fixed at a certain point so you know what it is. Figuring out what percentage of assets there might be, what you will agree to divide, like retirement accounts perhaps, or not divide. There's so much to learn about here, and that's why we will have the following sessions. And I will go through the rest of the questions as I said, the following sessions occur. So Judy, if you would do me a favor and just cut and paste them, the ones that we haven't answered.
Great.
And then we'll make sure that we cover them in the next session. And I look forward to seeing everybody in the next sessions to come. And thank you for Hello Prenup, Julia, Lauren for being here, and Amanda, and then Judy for putting this together. And for all of you for listening to us talking all this time.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for moderating this. And thank you to everybody who came tonight.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.